What's up, dog?
What's up, dog?
How is
What's up?
everyone?
We have another episode, another special episode.
Another drop.
Sorry,
Another drop.
another drop of the episode. Um, First of all, we are What's Up, Dog. My name is Brandon.
I am James.
And I'm Keith.
Yes, So, if you have not, please do subscribe to us. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Follow us on Instagram at What's Up Dog _ podcast. This is where you can engage with us. You can talk to us. You can message us anytime. Talk about any topic you want for us to discuss, and we'll try to entertain it. And of course, if you have any other guests you have in mind, we would probably try to invite them on our podcast too. We have a very special episode today because it's our first international guest. She is pretty well known in the dog circuit or industry as well. She's a force-free trainer. Her name is Denise Fenzi. Um, and James had the privilege to speak with her today. So yeah,
One-on-one.
James, yeah, one-on-one. Let us know how did we get her? What was the whole notion and whatever conversation about?
Yeah, it's really interesting because you know how the three of us on this podcast we all regard ourselves as balanced trainers. So naturally we gravitate and we follow the other balance trainers, and we always talk about balance training. And yeah, we spoke about how it's quite interesting to sort of open our eyes and see what other people are doing, what sort of results they're getting. And I think Denise Fenzi would be one of the pioneers or leaders in the force free segment. So it's quite interesting to get her on. Um, I mean, she's summarized it at the end, and I felt it the same way. So a lot of what we spoke about was challenging both ways. So she challenged the way I thought about dog training, and then I challenged her the way she thought about dog training. Really,
Did
really,
she manage? Did she manage to convert you to be a force free all the
you
way?
know, I wouldn't say all the way, but certainly there was a seed of inception planted in my head. And as you guys will all listen to the interview later, the most pronounced thing that sort of stuck in my head, and I can't recall if she said this word for word, or at least it was to the effect of, if your dog is engaged with you, like you come out and your dog is wanting to play with you already, right? And you've got a dog that is motivated and will do anything to get the food from your pouch, or to do anything to get the toy from you. Why would your dog not listen to you? I mean, we know that the dog would do anything, right? So why would the dog not listen to us? And she sort of went down this route of explaining that it's really not that the dog is challenging you. It's really not that the dog is stubborn. The dog will do anything for you, but maybe the dog really do not understand. And sometimes when you test it, then you realize that, hey, you know what, the dog does not understand, and I need to break it down into more subcomponents. So her view is that um, but before correcting, that we should first move back and see if the dog truly understands. And to her experience, more often than not, you change the training method, you change the session, and then voila, the dog does it. So that was quite interesting for me. And it wasn't like she wasn't sort of like shoving it down your throat and say you must be force free because that's the humane way. She's just sort of saying that um, maybe your dog don't understand what you think your dog should understand.
Okay, so we don't want to waste her time now because you're also on the other line with her right now, right? So let you get back to her, and we'll start this podcast with her.
Yes, enjoy.
Welcome. We've got another episode of What's Up Dog for you. Today we've got a very interesting podcast. I have here with me a free spirit who've accomplished so much, not just in the dog sport world, and I'm confident she will still accomplish a lot more. She's a writer. storyteller, a dog trainer, an entrepreneur. Um, Best known for all her flashy and precise obedience work, as demonstrated by not one but two AKC obedience trial champion dogs. Perfect scores in Schützen, in Monduring Ring Spot, in obedience. And she's titled dogs in obedience, in tracking, Schützen, Monduring, herding, confirmation, and even agility. So please welcome Denise Fenzi.
Thank you so much.
Good evening. So it's Thursday evening for you, Friday morning for us.
Correct, yes.
So let's wind it way back. I mean, share with us, when did your relationship with dogs begin, and sort of bring us on that journey on how, you know, you ended up here on this chair in front of us.
Well, it's a long journey. I've been involved in competition for 40 years. So that's a long time. My parents had dogs, and so I raised a couple of puppies for guide dogs. And after I did that, my parents said I could have my own dog. And so I got a Sheltie. It had to be a small dog. And way back then, the only dog sports were obedience and tracking and conformation. So nothing else existed. And I wanted a dog that could do obedience and conformation. And so after the Shelties, I had several Shelties, and I did sort of lower level obedience titles with them. And I dabbled in conformation, but didn't get too far with that. I did not do tracking with a Sheltie. After I finished college and had my own place, I really wanted a bigger dog. And I wanted a dog that could do more things. And I knew about Schützen, which, by the way, did exist, but it's not an AKC sport, so I wasn't really paying a lot of attention.
So it
And
peripheral?
yeah. I mean, it exists, but it's still not an AKC sport. It's its own thing. And so I was really intrigued by what kind of a dog could do as many things as possible. And if you really get down to it, a dog that can do the protection work, the obedience, the tracking, the conformation, there are very few breeds that can do well at all of that. And I got it down to a Belgian Shepherd or a German Shepherd. And then I kept reading about problems with health with German Shepherds, and it made me nervous. Whereas the Belgian Shepherds seemed to be healthy. And I thought the fluffy ones were cuter than the smooth-coated ones.
Yeah. Oh, but
And
you missed
so
there we go, the Rottweiler.
it's true. And a Rottie would have been one of the options, because Rotties also do herding, and I wanted to be able to try that too. So anyway, I ended up with a Belgian Tervuren, and since then I've had many of them, and have sort of evolved. Back then, I was a fairly traditional trainer, which most of us were. Times change, and you evolve as times change.
Where did you learn from in the early stages? Like, was it did you learn from a club, or was it a private mentor? How did
Oh, that's such an interesting question. It's very different than it is now in the United States. So back then, there were dog training clubs all over the place. So we would have like a local fairgrounds, a place where you have an exposition center. And one of the purposes of these exposition centers was public service. And so a dog training group could use these buildings very inexpensively when it wasn't the fair. And I would say most communities had those. So that was before box stores. There were no pet clubs. There were no Costco's. There was none of that existed. And so if you wanted to train your dog, most people went to the local, they were 8 weeks at the time, 8-week long local training club. And maybe you did 8 weeks of on leash, 8 weeks of off leash. And the classes were patterned on the AKC obedience system. So you didn't really have manners class. Like nowadays, you have loose leash walking and you have manners. We really did not do that back then. And dog trainers tended to be either, at that time, a lot of women did not work. So they were married, maybe, and then they were, maybe they raised their kids and now they had free time. So they maybe did a lot of volunteer work. So most of those trainers were people who were hobby trainers for obedience. And on the side, they would do these volunteer classes. That has evolved a lot in the United States. Now we have many, many box store trainers. We have many more private trainers. We have schools that people go to become dog trainers rather than volunteer. So back then, I remember it was Tuesday nights, and you went to the fairgrounds, and they were huge. The classes were huge. You know, you would have 100 dogs in there, split into sections, not all in one place. But
Right.
you know, it would be a great big exposition building,
Yep.
and there would be beginner and intermediate and advanced, and then all of the competition and they would just run from 6 till 10 or whatever. So different than what we see now.
And that influence a lot of your style today, or not at all?
No, I will say I'm sad for the loss, because it was a community thing. And I would say that the classes were very inexpensive because the rental of the buildings was inexpensive, and the people who taught were volunteers. So it was much more of a giving back to your community type of a thing. And I think the classes felt a little bit different. And nowadays it's much more of a profit-driven thing, and classes can be out of reach, I think, for many families to teach their dogs. And I think there's less of a community spirit. I mean, it doesn't have to be, and I'm sure it varies quite a bit where, depending on where you go. But back then, AKC shows, I don't know how much bigger they were, but they were way, way, way bigger than they are now. So dog sports have dropped quite a lot in the United States. Young people are maybe too busy, maybe not interested, I don't know, maybe doing other things. But the passion for, sorry about that.
That's all
I
right.
would say that the passion for dog sports has dropped in numbers. There's still, of course, many passionate people, but the numbers are down.
So where to from there? I mean, from coming to these big training halls, and then where did your journey sort of, or when did you split off?
Yeah, I would say when I was about 25, I moved to a new area, and I was working kind of difficult hours, so I couldn't just go to the club, and I was going to school at night and working, and it was difficult for a while there, but I wanted to have this dog, and I did get a dog. And so I knew enough to train at my home a lot. And I figured, oh, I'll go to classes later. And he was so much fun to play with a tennis ball that I started training him instead of traditionally, which is what I understood. I started thinking, well, at that time, you did not start your dog's training until it was 6 months old. But I figured, well, until it's 6 months old, I'll just teach it like tricks, like sit and down and everything, but not for real. And when the dog got to be 6 months old, he was doing so well and healing and all these things he could do. And I thought, well, I don't have to start his serious training yet. And I just kept training. But the fact is, he got trained. And I remember going to my first class when he was about a year of age, and he was out of control. I remember being kind of shocked that all of my beautiful training I was going to show everybody how amazing he was, and it didn't work out that way. Because at that time I didn't really understand about distractions, and that the dog would have a really hard time in a new place. I mean, I get that now, but you learn.
Yeah.
And so then I thought, well, I'll have to start my serious training now. So I definitely added some compulsion at that point with that dog.
Yeah.
But regardless, I still did most of the work with him with the tennis ball because he was doing well for it.
Yeah.
And he finished his AKC titles very quickly for the titles that were available at that time and what he could do. So I did get his breed championship, and I got his 3rd level obedience, and I got his tracking title all when he was 2. So he just went right through.
Yeah.
And then I started looking around, and I looked at that IPO, and I thought that looked pretty fun. Back then that was Schutzhund. And so I started going out there with him, and I was kind of appalled at the way people were training. It was so rough. I mean, I couldn't believe what I was seeing.
Was it the roughness, was it human to human or human to
Oh,
dog?
no. Oh, human to dog. And this was before eCollars.
Yep.
And most of it was with a choke chain. But let me tell you, people can be quite abusive with a choke chain. And I had never seen such hard training. And they're, jerking dogs everywhere. It was terrible. And I'm kind of a little bit oppositional. And I remembered watching that thinking, this is not appropriate. This is terrible. You shouldn't treat your dog like that.
And what year
so,
was this?
oh my goodness. All right. So let's see. I'm 52. And I got that dog when I was 24. So I would have been about 27, 37, 47. So 25 years ago.
5 years ago. So in
25,
the late 90s.
Yeah, that sounds right.
90s.
Yes, before I had my kids. And so I just looked at that, and this was the biggest club in the United States, just by coincidence. So it was a very big club. And I just, it was mostly show dogs. It was show line German Shepherd dogs, which have to get titled to be bred. And I think out of just defiance, I looked at that and I wanted to show them, you don't have to be so mean. So I was doing, of course, correcting my dog, but nowhere near like what they were doing. And I was doing very well. And they could see that my dog was well trained, and he came from AKC, which I will say in many ways it was harder because the environment's a lot more difficult. So at IPO, you mostly are on your own field. And so it's like home field advantage. So my dog did very well, and they could see he was doing well, and he was reliable off leash. And, that really was the beginning of my journey to kinder dog training. Was just against what I was seeing around me.
Yeah, I mean, that sort of leads to one of the questions that I had as well, because I think let's call it, I'm not going to get the terminology right here, but your method or the style that you've chosen has gained tremendous amount of popularity in recent times. And you are not simply riding a trend. You've been teaching this way for quite some time now. But yeah, I was trying to imagine as I was preparing the questions, thinking about this conversation with you, that in the early days you mustn't have been very popular. I don't think people must have liked you very much, because
Yeah.
because people would want to when you disturb someone's belief and what they're comfortable with, and you rock their world, defiance. People would challenge and question and attack. So how did you handle that? And what was it like for you in the early days?
Well, I would say I did not handle it very well because I was young, and young people sometimes don't carry themselves as well as they could. And so I was probably much more outspoken and said things I shouldn't have said. And, that's the way it goes sometimes. But I was out there training my dog. I was not anywhere near what I am now. I'm much, much more force-free now. So back then I was correcting my dogs. It wasn't that my dogs weren't on prong collars. They were, or on choke chains. I just wasn't using them very much. And I wasn't using them seriously. Everything was just softened, compared to what I saw around me. And so at that point, I was not nearly as good at AKC obedience as what the good AKC people were doing, but I was much better than the Schutzhund people.
Right.
And so, or at least at the level I was at. So in AKC, I never would have said anything because they were better than me. So I admired that they were getting high quality work, better than mine. And I would have been perfectly happy to beat on my dog if I could have gotten my dog to win the way their dogs were winning. So I would not have said anything over there. In Schutzhund, I was doing better than them with less compulsion. So I was probably more likely to speak out.
Yeah.
As time went by, and it's so hard to even say, because I didn't wake up one day and say I'm done with this. I just didn't do that. Over time, I used fewer and fewer corrections because I didn't need them, because I got better, and I just learned. I wasn't trying to. And I remember making fun of clicker trainers. That's absolutely top of my head. I remember thinking that was the dumbest thing. And I remember thinking that people who waited for their dog to do a behavior to reward it had a screw loose. Like, who would do that? And now I wait for my dogs to do behaviors, and I do quite a bit of shaping.
Yeah.
But as time went by, I got better, and I mostly worked in the Schutzhund world. By the time I went back over to obedience, many years had gone by. My dogs were much better, and they came in with something of a bang. So I remember the first show I went to after at least 5 years away. And one of my dogs got a 199.5 out of 200, and the other got a 199 out of 200. And that was at our national specialty. So people perked right up, because that's not the normal thing to have somebody come in and just win that significantly, who nobody knew.
Yeah.
And I mean, I remember the judge saying, "Who are you? Like, where'd you come from?"
And this was with Sisu?
That would have been Kisu and Soja.
Okay.
Yeah,
Kisu.
way back when. So I think Kisu won it and Soja was second.
Yeah.
And I did eventually, Soja got a UDT or UDTX, but I did not get a championship on her. Kisu was my second AKC obedience champion, not my first. She actually finished after my other dog, a later dog, Reika. And I did get a Schutzhund 3 on Kisu, and Soja also a Schutzhund 3. So they had a lot of titles that, still there are very few Schutzhund 3 obedience champions. I think there's maybe 3 or 4 in the United States, or have been. I don't know now. And so then people started paying attention. And then I started to teach very limited, but a few seminars, a little here, a little there. And somewhere in there, I was also teaching private lessons. And I became less comfortable with the fact that my clients were often not very talented trainers, or they were new trainers. And I started to realize that I was holding their dogs responsible, because I was using compulsion with them. I realized their dogs were being held responsible for the inability of the handler to train. So I wasn't even using it anymore, but I was with my clients. And I remember doing a few seminars and realizing the entire room was full of people whose dogs were fine, and the handlers were the problem. And it really, that did start to shift me, where I started to feel uncomfortable teaching methods that were absolutely not necessary for the dogs I was looking at. And I could just keep telling the handler, well, if you don't, I want you to really focus on walking a straight line, and that will solve this problem. And then it did. And then I want you to not lean forward, and that will solve this problem. And it did. And I could fix a lot of problems from there. I never even got to the dogs. I just fixed simple handler skills, and that fixed the dogs. And then the more I thought about that really starts making you think, well, wait a second. Why are we holding the dogs responsible? If I can take the dog and do it just fine, then I should be taking more responsibility for training you, the handler, to do it well, and less on getting the dog trained. And so I would say that is a work in progress to this day. Learning how to communicate in a way that people can be successful is a completely different skill set than training a dog. It's just night and day different. And I really like to do it. I really enjoy it. But it's much harder than training a dog, because you're two levels, right? You have to train the dog and the person.
We were just we just, I think it was last week or the week before, we had a conversation with a very good trainer based out in Singapore, Stephanie. I think her Instagram goes by Happy Tails Asia, and we were talking about the same thing, that oftentimes the dog is not the problem. They think they've got an aggressive dog, they think they've got this problem, that problem, but upon assessment, more often than not, it is something the human is unknowingly doing that is causing all these problems to flare up, and it could be the smallest of fix to sort of
Sometimes it is.
Can I just wind back a little bit, because I think I think above all else, one of the main reasons why we wanted you onto the podcast was to talk about your force-free or motivational methods in a sport that not too long ago was synonymous with compulsion. And you've accomplished a lot, I guess you've explained, using your motivational methods. But to be honest, I'm always a bit I would like conflicted as to where on the Skinner quadrant of operant conditioning, would you say you exclusively operate in the positive reinforcement realm, or do you also? So that, because when I read your books, I don't know if the camera will sort of show it. I've got the whole set, but when I read the books, it didn't feel like it was purely positive. It didn't feel like it was purely positive reinforcement. I certainly felt that certain things that you talked about to me were negative punishment, which I've got no issues with. But I just wanted to give you a chance to talk about what exactly your ideas and methods are, and within which quadrants of operant conditioning do you operate in?
Yeah, I almost never talk about the quadrants. I don't find them very useful. The reason, so for example, with my dog Dice, taking away the ball is an enormous punishment for that dog. So withholding something, he cares very much about the ball. I would argue that withholding a ball from that dog is a significantly more impactful and painful thing than me telling him no, or if I hit dogs, smacking him on the head. No, I don't. But if I did, from his point of view, I am pretty sure he would say, just give me the ball and then you can smack me.
Yeah, I
So
agree.
I have a problem using the quadrants as a guiding principle. I don't find that helpful. Instead, I ask myself, does the dog like what I'm doing or not like what I'm doing? It's that simple. There's happy bucket, there's unhappy bucket. Can I keep my dog in the happy bucket as much as possible? So I do have a line in the sand that I don't use what I would call techniques that are designed to cause physical pain. So I don't use things that I know are straight up aversive. But that doesn't mean I don't do things that my dog doesn't like sometimes. And like I said, just withholding a reinforcer is a negative for my dog. My goal, as much as possible, is to have my dog learning in a way that it's just a game. It's this great big game. We're playing the game, and then rules slowly get added to the game, and they never even really notice it. And when I do withhold something, it's not a no, it's just, let's do it again, let's do it again, let's do it again. You know, there's a lot of energy in it, and the dog's like, yeah, let's do it again. So then I would say, like, on a scale of 1 to 10, if 1 is a really unhappy dog and 10 is a really happy dog, how can I stay in that 8, 9, 10 as much as possible? That's my goal. I want super low frustration and stress in my training. I want my dogs winning. And I find that a better way to think than to think about what quadrant am I in, because frankly, not one time have I ever evaluated a training session and said to myself, I think negative reinforcement is the solution here. Like, I use techniques. There are things I do. I might hold my dog back by the collar. I might remove my dog from training, but I don't feel the need to justify for myself whether or not it is an ethical choice based on the quadrants. I think a little common sense goes a long way. I look at my dog. How does my dog feel about this? And do I have an alternative? Sometimes I don't know an alternative, so I'll remove my dog from training. The dog does not want to be removed from training, but I'm stuck. So it's less a punishment, even though the dog might perceive it as that, and more about, I need to fix this in my own mind. I am not a fan of high frustration training, and sometimes even very positive training, if the trainer is not particularly skilled, can be quite frustrating for the dog. And so I consider that problematic too. So then I would say, well, do you think your dog is enjoying this when your dog is barking and spinning and whining? I would say no. How can we get that dog a little bit happier? The fact that it's all hot dogs in the person's hand does not change the fact that if you're not giving them at the right rate or in the right place or whatever, that it's not a happy dog.
Yeah, that's
So-
super. I'm so glad you say that, because the reason why I say that I'm so conflicted, frustrated, is that, you know, I read some of the comments, on, for example, on your social media, from your followers, and they're all banging down this, you know, purely positive. But then I feel that it isn't purely positive, and it doesn't necessarily have to be purely positive, because I mean, I read in your book, I think, and I hope I got this sequence right, because you talked about how in training, when the dog does something right, we go, yeah, good, super, and the dog does something wrong, we keep quiet and we wait for the dog to offer an alternative behavior. What happens in trial? Because you talked about this in your book. Now the dog, you call the dog into for example, a downstay into a recall front. The dog comes in full speed, sits right in front of you, and then you stay quiet. Dog's gonna think, oh, doesn't feel right, I'll offer a down, offer a sit,
Yeah.
maybe a bark, down,
Yeah.
sit, or bark, right? And
Yeah.
so, to me, withholding the praise, staying silent on an incorrect behavior, staying silent on the correct behavior, sometimes in the dog's mind can be perceived as negative punishment. And I'm glad you said what you said, because I think listeners should know that even though it's a motivational, force-free based method, there are still elements of it, even though you don't want to describe it as such, but it does fall in that negative punishment realm, which teaches the dog some form of consequence, just that it doesn't inflict pain, or at least not physical pain.
That's the goal. I mean, I think if you actually speak with practitioners, they won't call themselves purely positive. I find that extremely unusual. The only time I hear that word is really from the balance trainer. So I hear balance trainers call me that, but I would never call myself that. In general, what the more positively based community says is that they are force free. And what they're talking about is not the quadrants, they're talking about physical force. So as much as possible, they avoid forcing another, right? So if you force your child to sit, no. You might persist, you might do a million things, but with your human child, you don't normally force them into a chair. So the term force free, I think, and then of course, people who want to be difficult start to say, well, oh, is it really not forced if you put the dog on a leash? And then now we're just getting stupid. So if we're actually trying to understand each other, which is always my goal is always communication with as little dancing around difficult topics as possible. Let's just talk. Let's be open. Let's be honest. Let's not use vague terms to hide what we are doing. Let's just have open and no, to be respectful and be honest. And you should understand why your methods work. You know, if you're using frustration in training, we can call it that. If we could call things what they are, if we could be more honest, if we could use the words that accurately describe what's happening, then that allows us to take a more interesting step, which is, and what are the ethics here? And is this the best way? But sometimes we're so busy. Like I watched somebody the other day put a collar on a dog, pull it up to a crate and hold the dog in such a way that the dog was sort of like it couldn't go backwards because it was so tight. So the dog finally jerked forward into the crate. The dog didn't want to go in the crate. And he said the dog had to choose to go in the crate. Now, I kind of have a problem with that. Yes, it is true that the dog had the choice to just sort of strangle backwards, right? But could we not use that word? That is what we call a euphemism. Let's just say it for what it is. Now, whether or not I approve of the training method is not the relevant factor. The relevant factor is that was not a choice-based situation. And the expression that comes to mind is, let's call a spade a spade. You might have been in a situation where you had no choice, where that dog had to go in that crate, because sometimes circumstances are like that. And then we need to say that. We need to say that sometimes in life there is no choice. And I forced the dog into the crate, not because I think that's the best way, but because the circumstances dictated it. But let's not call it choice if it's not a choice. And it was interesting to watch the backlash to this conversation, because some people are very uncomfortable with the truth. And I'm like, you know what? We need to separate out what is actually happening from how we feel about it. I don't even want to talk about the training method. I want to talk about the words we choose. So when people start quibbling, well, you can't call yourself force-free because your dog is on a leash, or like I would do a recall with a flexi leash. If the dog does not respond to my recall cue, I lock the flexi so the dog cannot self-reinforce with whatever is ahead of it. I call that common sense. Somebody else would say, oh, see, that's a punisher. You stop the dog. Did it put the dog in the unhappy bucket? Well, kind of, because I prevented my dog from getting what it wanted. Did I use physical pain to get there? Well, no, I simply stopped the dog from progressing. So if we stay out of the quadrants and spend a little bit more time using some common sense, like you hold your child's hand, we don't call that a punisher. We call it a way to keep them from getting hit by a car. I think that's sort of it makes more sense. It's more logical. Now, from there, we could say, well, then maybe we should put an e-collar on a dog and substitute that for the leash. So at least now we're having an honest conversation. Is the leash and collar painful when you lock the flexi? Yes or no? We could talk about that. Is the e-collar? Why does the e-collar work? Why does a physical fence work? And if we stop trying to prove our point and spend a little bit more time saying, well, from the dog's point of view, if I were the dog, which of these options would be most attractive to me? And since dogs learn like we do, and dogs feel pain and pleasure like we do, it's not that hard to put the possibilities on the table and say, well, knowing my dog and what my dog cares about, how would this be perceived by my dog? And if you're going to use punishers, then the next question is, do I feel good about that? Because people live in society too. It's not all about the dog. If the only player that you consider is the well-being of the dog, then you need to be prepared to organize your entire life 24/7 around one dog. You can't have children. You can't have multiple dogs, because by virtue of having multiple dogs, one dog might not get its way. This gets silly fast. And it seems more sensible to me to say, how can we maximize the well-being of all of the players, recognizing that some of them are not going to get their way at a given time because the interests of the whole are going to win. So I'll give you an example. Right now, I have one dog in here with me. She's having a nice little rest on her dog bed. She is happy. I have a second little dog in the house. I'm sure he is mad as hell because he loves to be out here when I do podcasts. He knows what a podcast is. However, I know that my neighbor's dog is out. And I know that that means every 5 minutes, he is going to go to the window and he's going to bark. So then I say, well, what are my rights? I would like to have this conversation without being interrupted. What are your rights? You invited me to this conversation, and out of respect, I would like my dog not to be barking through the whole thing. What are my little dog's rights? Well, on this occasion, his opinion is not going to win. And then there's a third dog, and the third dog is crated. And I'm crating him because he needs structure in his life, because he's just a challenging fellow. And if he was loose and I wasn't paying attention, life would be difficult all around. So is he happy that he is crated right now? Well, no, he's not. He would normally be loose at this time. So to me, even something as simple as crating, which doesn't even fall in the quadrants, does my dog fall in the happy or unhappy bucket in the crate? Well, I would say he's in the unhappy bucket, and I'm okay with that. So if we started to talk like this and think like this and stopped centering the dog exclusively, I think training would evolve in better ways, because then we might stop with the euphemisms and start with honest language. What is kind? What is fair? Would you do this to a child? I think that's a very relevant question. What will you do to a child? What would you not do to a child? I think respecting the dog as a sentient being is super important. My dogs do have rights, but they don't have all the rights.
I think it's really interesting because I have always felt that the existing terms that are out there today don't fully give me a bucket to fit into. So with that, I mean, the closest I can think of is a balance trainer. But in the balance trainer pool, there are people who would be more liberal with the use of correction, and there are people who would be more careful with the use of correction. I certainly, for me personally, I think the biggest gripe my teammates and my mentor have with me is that I don't correct my dog as often as I should, and I let little problems sort of creep. So I would fall into the bucket of using less correction than I should, but I certainly don't consider myself purely positive, not by a long mile, because I do teach my dog consequences. And I think what you're saying is that the existing framework to sort of fit ourselves into today isn't sufficient enough, or it's too inaccurate. And I think what you're saying is that there is this other way, which is just a simplistic, very logical way of thinking. Is my dog happy, unhappy? Is what I'm doing humane, inhumane, kind, fair? So it's using more logic, but not being afraid to give the dog some consequences. You got to be created. You have to be on a leash. You're not getting that ball right now. So it's just some form of discipline, but not hurting them.
Yes. I mean, my personal goal in actual dog sports training is it's pretty darn positive. And I think if we stopped worrying so much, we could spend more time saying, well, instead of a correction, what options do I have? So if my dog starts to forage and healing, and my instructor says to correct the collar, what alternative did we have? And the alternative is the second before your dog starts to forage, give your dog a cookie a few inches behind heel position. And if you just keep doing that, the foraging will go away, in the same way that if you keep correcting the dog for foraging, the foraging will go away. So when we know that there are more options, and when we have the conversations without the judgment, then I think the sheer quantity of compulsion naturally declines. because I think most of us, I'm going to, again, I talk about the 90%, the 5% at the top and the 5% at the bottom. I don't talk about the 5% at the bottom because those are the sick people, right? There's something wrong with them and they're abusive. And I don't talk that much about the 5% at the top because those people are world class and they're going to do a great job. I really look at the 90% in the middle. And I think the 90% in the middle are very focused on, if you ask them, all things being equal, would you rather do something that is kind or something that is unkind? Like for the dog, is it better if you have a choice, all things are equal, would you rather give the dog a cookie or yell at them? And I think most people, at least in their head, would say, no, I'd rather give the dog a cookie. Now, admittedly, in society, we do a whole lot of punishing and many of us go there naturally, but they want to be kind.
Yeah.
So from that place, then I think the next question is, okay, well, then let's lay out the options from kinder to less kind. And let's really talk about the pros and cons, but none of these conversations can take place when we're angry all the time.
Yeah.
And people are angry all the time.
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't want to dive into too much detailed example, but I'll give one example where this conflict sort of existed in my head. So my female Rottweiler, 18 months old, Hilda, she forges and she crowds in the heel. So I spoke to my mentor and my mentor's trainer, and so I had two different suggestions. So correction is always there as an option, but my mentor said it's my reward placement. So with the reward placement being irregular, inconsistent, so the dog is guessing, is it going to be in the front, is it going to be back? So so it was a lot about fixing that reward placement. My mentor's trainer suggested to train the dog to access the reward round the back. So you know, you're healing, and I'll give it a new command, get it, and then she would go around the back and get it from this side. And when the moment she swings around, I could toss it, I could throw it, I could do it in any direction. But her first point of call was to go around the back, and that sort of creates an anticipation. So I got to look at this guy somewhere in the face, but then the reward is going to be somewhere in the back, and then she sort of self-balances somewhere in the middle. Yeah, so that's one example where, you know, to your point, I think sometimes we just have to think of an alternative before jumping to the correction. But then this is, I guess, where a balance trainer and your method would start to collide, in that after the dog understands this, that, hey, the reward's always from the back, they've got no business out in the front. And I've been consistent dropping my reward placement, you know, in the right position. But then for whatever reason, he or she gets too excited, hops to the front. In that instance, I feel that it warrants a correction, a pop on the collar, just to say, get back in place, get back in line. The reward is coming. How do you feel about that? That once a dog understands, is fluent in a particular behavior, that we can introduce light consequences to the dog?
Well, so if I was watching you, I would tell you why you were having the problem. I don't know because I'm not watching it, but there is a reason. So some of the things that come to mind, your dog's arousal level is too high for the dog stage of training. So I very slowly increase my dog's, like I'll run in place, for example. Can you stay in heel position when I'm running in place? Because if you can't, you sure as hell can't when we're actually on the move. So before we go anywhere, can you stay in heel position? How about if I go sideways? Running, can you still stay in position? Like all these little tiny details that I work on, and then so slowly, and I don't go in straight lines because straight lines cause forging. So if you can't go in a circle in a right box, you can't go anywhere. So because of how I build up the details, I don't really run into that problem. And as soon as I see my dog forging, I make a mental note. What do I need to fix here right now? So the question you're asking is awkward because you're asking me, is it okay? And it's not for me to decide.
Yeah.
Like each person decides for themselves. My solution when I run into a problem, at first I get frustrated. I want to be super clear about that. So I get frustrated, but then my next thing is, well, I don't correct my dog. So what do I do? And then I break the behavior down into bits and I figure out what pieces can I pull out and work on. And then I work on those and then I put them back. And it's actually amazing to me. Sometimes if I watch myself not in my own body, like I videotape and I watch as if I were a student, sometimes the answer is so obvious if I'm not in the picture. But remember that if I watch you train, I will know why your dog is doing it. I'm just not looking at it. And like what you described, just so you know, dogs never crowd that aren't foraging, right? So you don't even have to worry about the crowding. If you solve the foraging, you solve the crowding. So my first thing is, what do I deal with? Well, I don't bother with the crowding because crowding isn't the problem. Crowding just comes along for the ride. So I have a foraging problem. Well, why do I have a foraging problem? And I love that your mentor recognized reward placement. But realistically, if your dog has learned that it's comfortable to wrap their neck around and look at your face, that's not going to solve it. I mean, it will reduce it, and it will help when you have a toy on your body. But as soon as you add straight lines and you're on your 30th step forward and the ball is not on your body, it's going to come back. So at some point, the dog has to understand why they are in the correct position. So do you teach the dog maybe a cheek target against your hip? You have options. And then you can tell the dog what to do instead of what not to do. Because it sounds like maybe like you're telling your dog, well, don't forage, but then what do you want the dog to do? And so then the dog's like, well, what does that mean? And then I say to the handler, well, what is heel position? And frankly, by the time we're done talking about it, the handler cannot tell me what is heel position. Saying the dog's neck next to my side is not nearly precise enough. That's 6 inches of range right there. No, tell me exact what is heel position. Define it for me. What part of your dog's body connects to what part of your body? And once you have that, now what are you going to teach the dog? You're going to teach the dog, I want your head up high. I want to feel your cheek against my hip. If I feel that, your position is correct. If I halt and I look down, are your toes aligned with my instep? If yes, you're correct. If they're not, you're not correct. So then I have to think, the dog isn't looking down. So how can I communicate that to the dog? So a little bit, I think the problem solving is quite different with a positive mind, with a more traditional mind. But I find that traditional trainers, if I tell them how to solve problems, they're pretty happy. So they're like, oh, yeah, no, that does work for me. That solves my problem. And most of them are pretty willing. But the next step for those who care is not to listen to my solutions. It's to learn the process I went through to tease apart the problem and then find the weak spot and then try to fix that.
So it sounds like the way to sort of shift from, if someone were to think about shifting from, the term's not right, but if someone's thinking to shift from a balanced trainer to a more motivational approach, would be to start to arrest problems a lot earlier and think of how to solve them in mini steps so that you just don't get to the point where you have to pop the collar. It's sort of
yeah, we talked a lot about splitting and lumping. And lumping is when you mentally say, I am going to teach my dog to heel. And splitting is when you say, I'm going to teach my dog a head position, a foot position, a position next to my body. Now I'm going to teach the dog one step sideways, one step backwards, one step to the left, one step to the right. Now I'm going to teach my dog that sometimes my feet run in place and sometimes I do weird things with my hand. Now I'm going to teach my dog how to flip to my right hand side to get the reward. And then one day maybe we'll actually go somewhere, but the pieces are broken down differently. And the irony is it actually goes faster. So if you watch my training for the first 9 months, 10 months, I don't give any commands. I don't say sit. I don't say down. I don't seem to do anything. It's like, God, the dog has all these really interesting, cool, accurate skills. And then 2 months later, like, oh my God, that dog is doing the whole program. Because eventually I take those pieces and I just string them together. But usually, like the very first time I do a retrieve, the dog is probably going to do it correctly because I already taught the dog how to sit in front, how to hold an object, how to stay under provocation, how to pick things up no matter what. I've done all that. And then one day I'm like, well, let's just throw it and see. And the dog will likely get it right.
Yeah.
But it's largely a mental thing about thinking that way. And then when the pieces come together, in my opinion, the performance is often much higher quality. Like you never go through ugly phases where the dog doesn't seem to be correct. It always looks pretty. Sometimes people just haven't got a clue what the hell I'm doing. Like they're like, why is she throwing the ball?
So in its individual part, it looks nonsensical. Is that what you?
A little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like little things like teaching your dog to spin at your side. Like, why do you do that? Well, I do that because the dog's butt can't go out. So and I know my dog's high energy, so he's going to want to forge and wrap like your dog. But every time I tell him to spin, it absolutely prevents it. So instead of using food or toys, because I don't want my reward schedule that high, I've just substituted a behavior which is incompatible with the one I think my dog will choose. So, when you start thinking that way, I have this incredible bank of things I can use to substitute for it. Like if you start to creep forward on your position changes, you also know how to back up. There is nowhere in obedience when my dog needs to back up on cue. And yet I teach my dog to back up 30, 40 feet, because when my dog is 40 feet
In a
away and
straight
not
line,
nailing a
I saw.
position,
Yeah.
if I can, I want the dog at that distance to be able to do positions, because it sort of just eliminates the issue of the dog coming closer, or things like going around a cone. To me, the ability to go around a cone is fundamental. I can teach so many, anywhere there would normally be a stay, I can substitute a cone. And that's quite helpful, because then I don't have to work on my stay. I can just send the dog around a cone and then practice my recall. So I don't even have to walk out. And then I send the dog again and I'll practice my front, and I can keep twisting my position each time.
Yeah. So you get
So I've got lots of skills like that.
Yeah, interesting. Now I want to, I mean, just off the back of that, like you've got a vast range of sort of arsenal to tackle very different problems, but I know you hold no animosity towards balance trainer. I mean, you regarded yourself as a balance trainer at some point, but coming to the topic of eCollars and prong collars and whatever other collars there might be out there, would you say that your issue is not that people are using it, but that they're using it unfairly? Or is that still too light a statement? Is your stance maybe,
so difficult.
because the reason why I'm asking that on the back of your earlier topic is that not everyone has that vast range of arsenal to tackle all sorts of problems, and sometimes we sort of have to admit that a person with less tricks in his or her tool bag could stop a dog from going into big trouble.
So mentally, I really do differentiate dog sports from life. So let's say you put an e-collar on a dog to teach a dog a recall. And the reason you do this is because you love to hike. And every day you take your dog for a 2-hour hike in the woods. But your dog must recall for safety. I think that is a very different use of the e-collar than trying to use an e-collar to make your heeling prettier. Because the one is not for the dog at all. It's a sport, it's a game, and it feels not very sporting to me to use a pain compliance technique on your partner. It's like, well, how about you just up your skills? But running your dog in the woods, one could easily argue that the dog benefits greatly, and that the dog, if it could speak, might say it's worth it. It's sort of like I get a flu shot every year, not because I enjoy my flu shot, but because I don't want to get the flu. So to me, the slight discomfort and inconvenience of getting the flu shot is a choice I make to avoid the flu. I think there are dogs out there who, if they could say to you, I would like to have the inconvenience of the collar on occasion against not getting to go for my 2-hour run off leash in the woods. Now, this is a place where I break from the positive reinforcement community. So I want to be clear, I am not representing the positive community when I give you this statement. I am representing myself. I do not choose with my own dogs to use an e-collar. So I don't teach my recall that way. I have the time, inclination, and skills to teach without it. But when I'm looking at a pet person who does not have the time, inclination, or skills, and yet they love their dog and are willing to do the 2-hour run, then I don't feel that it's my place to tell them the answer to that question. Then there's the dog sports world. And I say, well, realistically, as soon as you start using compulsion, your skill stops. Like almost by definition, when you go there, you have stopped the process of exploring and learning what is possible, because it is most certainly possible to get all of the skills to a high level without. So I would say the more sporting answer is that you should take responsibility and learn how to do that and treat your dog with that respect. And there's also some pretty strong psychology, human psychology, about the use of punishers. So people, it sounds terrible, but actually people like to punish. They feel justified in their punishment. I taught you this, you know it, therefore now I'm going to punish. But realistically, you did not teach your dog, or your dog wouldn't be making that error. So, what is the dog's motivation when you have the ball, right? So clearly the dog really doesn't understand how to be successful in this circumstance, or does not understand why it's worth their while.
Yeah.
And I would think the more sporting answer is to put everybody on the same playing field, and everybody does not use these power tools, and everybody suffers, and everybody learns, and they come out stronger and better. So that's kind of where I stand. I think a lot of people, I don't know, did you hear the conversation with Nino a few days ago? I had, all right.
I think it, yeah.
So it was, the one thing I would say, I really thought I went into it and we were only going to talk about dog sports, and it ended up covering a lot more territory. And what made me uncomfortable is that I don't feel I represent the force-free position when the conversation goes more broadly. I feel I do represent it when we're talking about dog sports. So it was a little uncomfortable, because I don't doubt for a moment that some positive reinforcement trainers listened and truly turned green when I said I could see putting a bark collar on a dog living in an apartment building, who is joyfully barking because the leaves are falling, and the neighbors are hating everybody, and the stress level of the owner is through the roof because they can't make their dog be quiet. I have a hard time saying that you have to just keep finding another way, especially since a bark collar is completely controlled by the dog, and the dog can learn fairly quickly. But there is the other side, which is dogs bark for a lot of reasons. And frankly, a lot of dogs are just distressed. And so now it's really kind of cruel to put a bark collar on a dog that's struggling. And that is a very real thing. So it's just difficult.
For me personally, I think I resonate more and more as you're talking. I start to see myself reflecting the views that you have. So, I bought an e-collar, like most people in the early days of dog sport. You got to get this, you got to get that. So, I was shopping online, and one of the things I bought was a dog truck. Now, I've had 4 Rottweilers, of which 2 I've tried to train for IGP. I've not titled any dogs before yet, but I really did find a huge conflict using the e-collar in training, or for training, whatever you want to call it, or for sport purposes. But I do put it on, and I find that the only time I feel I'm okay to steam the dog is when, for example, we're training outdoors, and so I need to put it into a bit of context here. We're in Malaysia, predominantly Muslim country. Dogs are not allowed in many places. There are only a few selected parks where dogs are allowed, and in those instances, there will be too many dogs in those parks because those are the only parks that are allowed. So I end up training in a lot of abandoned housing land, or this guy have purchased this land but haven't built a house on it yet. So it's very urban where I live. So I'll be training my dog, and in the actual training, so whether we're doing heel work, we're doing fetch, whatever we're playing with, I hesitate to use the e-collar. But if she gets the reward and she's happy, she's just parading around, and that's fine. But then she starts heading towards the road, or she sees a kid cycling and she starts heading towards the kid, I have no issue whatsoever to zap it. And she knows that the moment she feels that, she turns right around and comes back to me, and then we engage and we play again. So I put it on during training, but it is only used as a matter of exaggerated, but life and death. She hits a kid, she bites a kid, she's on the road, a car hits her, that sort of situation, I use it. I've got an older dog at home, Panda, also a Rottweiler, and she's not a sport dog, she's a pet dog, and she barks like a mad dog only during the day, only at my neighbor on my left side. And it's very embarrassing, and because I'm trying to maintain a human relationship with my neighbor, and my dog wants to kill you, it doesn't look right. So I find that the anti-bark collar on her works fantastic, because with the collar on, she'll just go to sleep. She won't even think about charging and lunging and barking, right? She'll just go to sleep. In the night, where I know my neighbor is not wandering around the house, I take it off. And if she needs to bark at an intruder, fine, go ahead. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that I feel that there are instances where its use can make everyone's life a lot better and easier. and then there are times where its use can be abused. So yeah, I'm not for falling completely into one bucket and say use it, and I'm not for falling into another bucket and say don't use it. But I think, like what you say, taking a more, set aside the term, set aside the classification, and just think of it in logic and think of it in the greater fairness of not just the dog but also the humans around the dog.
Yeah, and I do think people need to be aware that it's easy to take out frustration and anger on a dog when we have these kind of powerful tools. So some part of our head always have to remember that, because it's almost a normal thing to start getting angry and upset when we don't get our way. But I do think that if we're super conscious of that and always asking ourselves those questions, am I doing this to benefit the dog? Is this to everybody's benefit? Does my neighbor have the right not to be terrorized? I think that's an important thing. And I sure wish we had better general knowledge of dog body language and understanding a fearful dog from an aggressive dog, from a bored dog. We really are not very good as a society. I mean, actually, we're just appallingly bad. And dogs often are punished for things that are just not their fault. Like in the world of behavior, it's kind of terrible. Some of the things that happen to dogs that are just afraid, and they're being punished so hard. Or they may be angry, but the problem with the corrections is you're suppressing the external show of the anger and the behavior, but you're not changing how the dog feels. And now you're actually potentially creating a dangerous dog, because if those emotions continue to bottle up and then you forget because you haven't seen them. Yeah, you haven't seen them for 6 weeks because you kept correcting them. And then one day the trigger comes too close and the dog explodes because he can't handle the pressure. Our lack of understanding about why dogs do things they do is a problem. And I personally, if eCollars are going to be out there, I really believe they should be sold through professionals only. I don't think you should be able to buy one on Amazon. I think you should have to go to a person who is a specialist. And I think that person should have gone through significant online, training about not only how to use the collar, but to really understand. If a dog has separation anxiety, it's cruel to use a collar to stop the behavior, things like that. So that they really, really understand dog behavior. And then, I think there's a place for that. But, we're far from that so far.
Yeah, agree. I want to give you a chance to address without emotion, because I'm not emotional about this, so it gives you a good chance to sort of talk about it. Some things that your detractors, I'm not sure that's the right word as well, would challenge you with. So I'll give a couple of examples now. And this is sort of challenging that force-free mentality, or that motivational method. So what happens when your dog runs off to do something that is self-rewarding? So chasing a squirrel, barking at the mailman, how would, in your world, how would you explain to someone that, hey, you don't need to use force to fix that? Because to me, for example, I find it quite difficult. I mean, the act for the dog in itself is already rewarding. I don't need you to reward me. I've got a live prey running around. I'm going after that.
Yeah, well, the first thing is I am hyper aware of that issue when my dogs are young. So I don't take them places where they have that opportunity without a leash. So I'm going to be super conscious of management and habit. And then I'm going to, especially for a sport dog where this is going to be an issue and I know it, I go out of my way to go places where those things will exist, where I have a leash, where I have my best possible toys, and where I have options for teaching the dog. If you look back at me, we are going to have the most amazing game of tug, but I'll wait you out. And I just make sure I'm far enough away that the dog is sort of aware of a squirrel. And pretty quickly what starts to happen is the dog looks at a trigger and then looks back at me like, cool, squirrel, what are we going to do? So it's really a matter of paying a lot of attention. The second thing is I spend a lot of time, I actually have to do a video on this for another program, on engagement. So I don't just put the leash on the dog, attach the collar, and out the door we go for 1 mile walk. From the time I open the door, I'm going to be thinking about things like dropping cookies on the ground before we even start. So the dog is I'm on the radar. And then after 30 seconds, calling the dog to me, making a big fuss, cookies, play, now go play again. So constantly interrupting the dog's access to the world so they remember I'm there. The other thing I do, if I can, I have a place here where I can go, a huge area, off leash legal, nothing to hurt the dog. Certainly things to be gotten into. And if I can, I'll take a little puppy there, 8 weeks old, 9 weeks old, and I set them free. Because little puppies, they don't go that far. Now I have to say, Dice, he broke the mold. That dog would go 80, 90 yards.
Yeah.
But you know what? That was fine, because once he got 80, 90 yards away, I'd watch him very, very carefully. And just at the second I would realize that he realized how far he was, I would whistle, run the other direction with my toy, and it would take him a minute to catch me. By the time he caught me, he would be beside himself. I mean, just so frantic. And I would play with the toy. And that dog has one of the best whistle recalls I have ever seen on any dog, because I taught him when he was so little that I have a video somewhere online of him at 12 weeks of age chasing a rabbit. I whistle and you see the dust fly. He turns around so fast and comes back. But that's because of I set that up early and I made an impact on him. And to this day, I don't know, I think today's video on Instagram was me with the flirt pole, waving it like crazy and then whistling, and he just zooms right back between my legs. I haven't worked on whistle recalls in 6 months. I've done 2 or 3 days in the pool. All I've done was that early puppy stop, and then I come back around to it. But you have to be much more conscious of your choices if you're not going to use compulsion later on. Like, you can't just say, well, let's just let them be children and we'll get to it later. Like, that's not an option. You have to be thinking earlier on about engagement.
So in your so to that question, in your method, just to summarize, so 3 things would be: 1 is start earlier, don't wait till it becomes a habit. B, create some form of classical conditioning where I see squirrel, I know I'm going to get to play with Denise. And then 3, to sort of show the dog that there is a value in the squirrel and there's a value in the toy, but the value in the toy is higher than the value of the squirrel, because you actually get to bite this one and you know, you get praises. Okay.
And you never get to get the squirrel. So.
Second question. So beyond the early stages of learning, you know, where we could be using a combination of luring and free shaping, once a dog sort of understands and acquires that knowledge, and it's clear that the dog understands, acquire that knowledge, but refuses to comply. Now, in your method, how is the concept of consequence introduced to the dog?
That's so rare, really.
Yeah, we covered this a bit earlier.
Yeah, because I'm so conscious of I don't ask for things if I don't know I can get them. So, I mean, I wouldn't even start working a dog who wasn't staring at me and asking me to work. If the dog is not leaping up and down in front of me and demanding we start, I don't start. So there are very few situations when I would be giving a dog some known cue. I mean, if they've asked to work and they've asked to play, then if they don't do it, they really don't get it. Like, if a dog is staring right at me, wagging its tail, and I say sit, and it stands there wagging its tail, clearly it doesn't understand that if it puts its butt down, the toy is going to come, or it would have done it. And if the dog is just so high in arousal, it wants the toy so badly it's frozen, then my mental model is the dog is truly frozen. Because if it wasn't, it would sit, because it's going to get the ball. So then my question has to be, how can I lower that dog's arousal so it's not frozen, so that it can learn the skill? So it's quite unusual. But let's just say, because I mean, all things happen. I say sit, and at that exact moment, a bird goes by and the dog looks at the bird. I just step out of position. The dog looks back and I say, what you doing? And we play again some more, and I wait till the dog asks to work, and then I say sit, and the dog will sit this time. So I don't spend a lot of energy worrying about it. I mean, dogs can fail. I can tell you, I've been to many a dog show and my dogs have failed. Things happen, life happens. I fail on a fairly regular basis, because people do also. It's not as big a deal as people think it is. It's just one of those things. It's part of life. And sometimes you get stressed or overwhelmed, or, you know, I do spend a fair amount of energy looking at the situation and asking myself, if I try to work here right now on this pile of goose poop, how likely am I to win? And if my answer is not likely at all, I'm probably not going to start. But with an advanced dog, like a dog like Dice, he can work on a pile of goose poop. He doesn't care. He's focused on his working at his toy. So I'm always pushing just a little, because if you don't push, and this is one area where I think positive reinforcement trainers are somewhat weak, they don't force themselves forward because it's so fun to do things dogs are good at in your backyard.
Yeah.
And that is why I
I'm
spend
guilty
very
of
little
that.
time doing things my dogs are good at in my backyard, because that's not progressing my skills, even though it's fun and easy. If I'm working in my backyard, I'm pushing very hard on a skill. Then I go away from home and I work on things that are easy. And then eventually those two things come together. So teaching is always in the most comfortable place, my home, my yard.
Yeah.
But once that's known, then if you don't push, you will go nowhere. You will just go in circles.
Okay. So, all right. Sorry, I'm just recapping everything just to make sure that, you know,
Of course.
because I think maybe, your level is a bit higher. So, if the dog, so you're saying if the dog, clearly understands the behavior, or we think that the dog clearly understands the behavior and doesn't want to work. So your view is that the dog's not a robot. It doesn't have to be, on point every single command. We just sort of take a step back, reset, consider the environment, and get the dog in the mood, and then we restart again. Fair.
Exactly.
Fair summary. All right.
Super, yes.
Yeah. So next question. Say if I were a listener, all right, and I was curious about your approach. I'm like, first time I'm seeing and hearing from Denise. I've been using this method, compulsion, my whole life. But I have a dog that is lunging and barking and possibly trying to bite out of fear or aggression or defense, whatever it may be. Humans and other dogs within reach. How would a no consequence method hold up in an extreme scenario where I want to do what you're doing, but shit, like the beast in the cage back there is not going to jam with me?
Yeah. So the first thing is I stop bad behavior. So if my dog is lunging at another dog or person or anything, then society has rights. I stop that behavior. I stop it however I have to stop it. If that means I have to pull the dog up on a leash and collar, I'll do that. I'm not correcting the dog to punish the dog. I am stopping the behavior. If I have a less invasive way of stopping the behavior, I will use that. So if I can take a cookie and stick it in front of the dog's nose and lure the dog away, I will do that because I'm not worried about reinforcing that behavior if the behavior is coming from a place of emotional overload, right? The dog is so over the top with anything. It doesn't matter. It could just be excited to see your neighbor. It's still not an acceptable way to approach people. So I just need to get the dog out of there, but I do not stand there and let my dog act the fool because it's too upsetting to other people. And frankly, it becomes a habit. You don't want your dog to develop this habit of behaving that way. But if I see that my dog has a problem, and that means I see it more than once, I start to see a pattern, then I'm not going to put my dog in a situation where we're going to see that again. I'm going to ask myself, what causes this behavior? So my neighbor coming out. All right, what can I do to ensure that I don't come outside when my neighbor's coming out? Like I'm going to the best of my ability, manage the situation while I make a plan. Okay, so now I know the neighbor's going to come out at 7. What happens if I walk down the street and start training my dog, distracting my dog, feeding my dog at 6:59 so I can treat them like a squirrel and give them something else to do? That's probably how I'm going to do it. But I do think it's important that people understand and have permission to stop behavior which is scary or frightening to others. In the same way, really, I treat it just like I would with a human child. If your human child is screaming and yelling and threatening and running after another, you will stop them. You will stop them physically. You will stop them. You're not going to hurt them if you can help it, but you don't let them hurt others in society. And then if you know that every day you go to the park, after they're there for 20 minutes, they have a meltdown, what do? Well, you don't wait 20 minutes. You leave after 18 minutes, right? You pay attention so that the problem can be avoided. With dogs, we have a tendency to set them up to correct, but it's a little bit questionable because you need to remember that if you keep your child at the park for 25 minutes and you know they're melting down at 20, even if you punish them so they don't show it, they're still feeling it inside.
True.
And it's really just a matter of time before they explode worse. So I don't really want to suppress behavior. I'd rather, if my dog is feeling angry, I would much rather they just bark because that's better than biting. So just give me the information I need so that I know if I have a problem or if I don't have a problem, and then I can start to address it.
Interesting. Very nice. Hey, sorry, I'm just we're on the hour mark. Are you still okay to continue? Because I am, but I
A
didn't
little
want
bit, but I know my phone is going to go because I just got warned that I'd used 20% of I have 20% of my
Oh gosh.
battery,
All right. So
but I'm good for a bit.
yeah. So I'm not trying to trap you here. Just hypothetically, I want to understand if you ever had to use an e-collar on a specific dog for a specific case, just for a specific reason, using your philosophy or your methodology, how would you approach, or what would you feel, if ever, what would be a fair method to introduce um, an e-collar to a dog? And critically, when? I know the answer is always going to be never, hopefully.
Yeah,
but
no, I hear you.
yeah.
The first thing I would do is get up to speed on best practices with the e-collar.
Hmm.
So, because I don't know that I'm up to speed on best practices with the e-collar, but it would be on leash, probably with a recall cue, probably when the dog is facing away, I would layer it. So, come, if the dog doesn't respond, low level, first you make sure you're on a low level, turn it on. As soon as the dog's head starts to turn away from the distraction, turn it off, cheer the dog on, give the dog a cookie. So I would actually consciously set it up. I would put the dog in a situation where I knew there was something they wanted out there so that it would happen. You put a hot dog on the ground at 10 feet away, you have your dog, you could be a flat collar. You let the dog look at the hot dog, you call, you know they're not going to come. I would probably train it that way because I could control exactly how difficult it was for the dog. I could be sure there was no other people around when it happened, no other dogs around, that the only criteria the dog heard was the recall and the collar. So it didn't go, oh my God, it's plants, it's garbage cans, it's all that. And then I would stay at that level until the dog, when I said come, it turned immediately from the hot dog, and then I would add movement. So there I was at a standstill, I would add slow movement towards the thing. And then I would slowly generalize that skill, again, against distractions that I placed as opposed to natural distractions. And when I felt comfortable, then I would take that in the world. And when I just felt that it was 100%, then you try it off leash and you start over again in a safe space.
Yeah.
And dogs are smart, they get it.
Yeah. No, very fair, very logical. Because I'm just trying to think whether in the framework that exists in your mind, whether there would, what would be defined as a fair approach, and that sounds logical and fair. I'm just flying through these questions because I'm worried about your battery. So personally for me, I do use some aversion on my dogs when it's fair to do so. So that sort of informs me on my puppy selection. So when I look for a dog, I look for a dog that will be afraid. So if a bottle drops on the floor or something, the dog will be afraid, but it's resilient enough or has the ability to recover from that sort of frightful moment of correction, not shut down, and then sort of turn around and reassess the situation. In your method, what informs your puppy selection, and what is important and what is not important? Recognizing, because there's different training methods, for example.
I don't think I choose differently. In my opinion, the dogs who do very well with positive reinforcement are the same dogs that do very well with compulsion-based training.
Okay.
So I really think, so for example, as fewer and fewer people are using compulsion in training, you'll notice it's still the same dogs that are successful. It's still the Belgians and the Border Collies and the Rotties and the Shepherds. They're up there. Any dog that likes to work and can hold up to trial pressure, because trial pressure is significant, it's not really going to matter. I think it's the same dogs that do well in both methods. I do think your choice of method can change how the dog interacts with you in a train. Like I think compulsion hardens dogs to the handler, whereas positive reinforcement methods soften dogs to the handler. So for example, if I raise my voice, my dog is very, very sensitized because I don't usually hit the negative side of the scale. Whereas dogs that get a lot of corrections start to look away, I don't know, avoid is not the right word. They put a layer between them. They stop listening the same way. It's like if you go to the store and there's a parent who's yelling and yelling and yelling at their kids. If you watch the kids look like it. They don't even care anymore. Just kind of, it's just this terrible background noise. Yeah, there's a numbness. Whereas parents who always speak really softly and quietly, when they raise their voice a little, the kids really notice. Beyond that, though, I actually think it's the same dogs that do well in both methods.
I'm going to skip to what would be my last question so that we can edit it in case your phone falls off,
Sure.
battery ends. So, I mean, you've got quite a few things happening. You've got the Fenzi Dog Sports Academy, you've got the High Drive Dog, you've got these books in front of me. And I'm not sure if I'm missing anything else, but what are these platforms? How are they different? Do they tie in? Do they not tie in? Can you share
The
with
High
us?
Drive Dog is I'm going to call it my pet program, but I don't mean it the way that sounds. It's
Yeah.
just my thing. It's my baby. I did it because I think high drive dogs get the worst of it, and I think they're the easiest dogs to train. So I would like people to understand that those are the ones you're supposed to use positive reinforcement on because they're so easy. And there's really this belief out there that, oh, they are so hard, so tough. I'm like, no, they're the easy dogs.
Yeah.
I would like to communicate that. And so it's very, very inexpensive program. It's really not designed to make money. It's designed because I care about this. I'm passionate about this topic. And I would like people to come and see, how did I train and raise a puppy from a working line so that I got the cooperation? That's why that program exists. The Fenzi Dog Sports Academy is much bigger and much broader. So we have, 35 classes a term. We've got 10 webinars a month. We got 10 workshops. We got self-study. It just goes on and on and on. It's huge. And it's not for any kind of dog. Hell, we even do other species, like we'll do a class for cats. And
Oh.
it's super, super broad. It's appropriate for pet people, behavior, sports. And that's where people go when they really want to learn a specific thing. So they don't want to just soak in, how does Denise raise and train a puppy? They really want to learn cooperative care. How do I get my dog's nails trimmed? All right, here's for you.
Okay.
So usually if people contact me, I usually send them that way if they're trying to learn a thing.
Right.
And then, like you said, there's books for people who are readers, and there's blogs. And frankly, you could train a dog off my social media and my blog. You don't have to buy a thing. I put so much free content out there for problem solving to help people that if you really want to learn about dog training, just follow me on all my platforms and you will learn a lot about dog training. And then if you want to spend some money, I'll take your money, but you don't really have to.
I saw your video on social media using the swimming pool for recall, which is such a great idea.
Yeah.
I like it. So
It worked great.
Yeah, I think a lot of our listeners can really benefit just by following your social media, and there's tons of videos out there. But say if one of our listeners wanted to subscribe or wanted to join the academy, and it's okay. From Malaysia, someone can just.
Oh, for sure. We're actually only 70% US.
Okay.
So we're 30% international already. It's a very, very international and welcoming community.
Right.
So we would love to have you. And actually, classes start, I don't know when this is going to publish, but tomorrow.
Oh.
So it's a great time to register because
this episode won't be aired for about another month. I think we've got a backlog.
Well, then in that case, they can do the following term, or they could do workshops, or they could do webinars. They're always self-studies, always running. The thing is, if they send a note, if they go to help@fenziacademy.com, a human being will tell them what to take. So it's overwhelming at first, I think. So if somebody sends a note and says, this is my kind of dog, this is my kind of problem, this is what I want to do, a person will say, oh, in December, we're going to have this class for you. We're going to have this webinar. So we'll make it easy. You don't have to suffer. You can just ask for help.
Awesome. Tell us a bit about Dice. Did you have him as a puppy? What have you done with him? What are your goals with him? Because he's the main, in terms of your social media, he's the superstar.
Yeah. I got him at 8 weeks. It's actually hard for me to talk about it. He's a very challenging dog. He's an amazing working dog, and he is so much fun, and he loves to work. He's a very difficult pet dog in my house. And so that's a thing, because my dogs are pets. They live loose and they all live together. And so trying to manage him when I have guests walk in my door, it's not that unusual for people to just, I wake up in the morning, somebody's sleeping on my couch. That's not that unusual. There's just a huge amount of people coming and going in activity. And this is a very hard thing for this particular dog. Reaction? Well, he definitely has the potential for aggression.
Okay.
And so, that's got my mind full these days. Is the the work is beautiful and fantastic, but trying to incorporate each element of your house with the rest of your family and their rights and your guests and all is it's on the top of my mind, and it's quite a management event to be successful with a dog of his just the way he is. He's just not like any of the Belgians I've had before, and I've certainly had my share of strong dogs, but yeah, he's a lot of dog. For work, he's been so much fun because more than any dog, he's sort of the culmination of things I've learned over time. So I've done the best job with him of any dog of breaking behaviors down, building them up, really creative problem solving. Like, how am I going to do a call off? And then I thought about the swimming pool, right? Because I really wanted, you asked about failure. I do not want failure. I want success every single time. And I go to some trouble to set up for success. And so that was a good example. Like, I got what I wanted in the pool. He's never failed. I put tons of pressure on the pool. I made that toy so damn appealing. I did everything I could. I could still call him off. Then I went out in my front yard and I'm really pushing it. So he is probably, more than any dog, taught me a lot about where I'm good at my training and where I need to work on my training. Pieces that I haven't refined appropriately, places I still struggle with his skills. I've had some epiphanies with him about the importance of, for example, fitness. Boy, what a difference. I started doing fitness work with him and there was just some dramatic changes in his position changes, his quickness, his ability to stop fast. Little things like that have been sort of amazing. And so I'm super grateful to him. I mean, he's also just been an extremely challenging dog because of his high levels of arousal and some of his behavior quirks. But at this point, I felt like I have a handle on that path of how to manage him successfully. I feel good about that. So really the more challenging issue now is trying to manage a dog of his type in a household that's wasn't exactly plopped down on this earth to be his type of place.
How old is he at the moment?
He's 20 months.
20 months. Oh, very close to Hilda, which is my female. Right. You expect that behavior to change? I mean, as they mature, as they increase in exposure, do you think his behavior would change, or his reactivity levels would change?
Oh, I actually am noticing changes, and I think dogs kind of go through waves. I don't know that you can assign an age to it, but I would say yes, that you'll notice some things get better. Like I would say his public behavior has had some phenomenal improvements over the last month, and some are like really almost shocking differences. Like, wow, I really can't believe how successful you're being here. So I'll notice that, like leaps of progress, which are pretty cool. And then at the same time, you'll see, unfortunately, you'll also see the reverse, which are, dramatic setbacks that you're like, oh, I really thought we were through that. I think dogs, when they're 3 or 4, are really who they are. And I think until you get there, it's not too unusual. I love dogs that are about 4. I mean, that's usually when you can really, they are who they are. They are stable. They are reliable. Yes, they have their best stress tolerance. You know what you're going to have, I think, from at about that point.
Hey, look, I'm sure you've got a busy day ahead of you training on your dogs. I don't want to hold you back any longer, but in the future, is there any chance we can get you back on here for a chat about other stuff?
Oh yeah, this was so fun. You challenged me. I appreciate that.
So just to our listeners, where can they find you? I mean, you want to, what's your Instagram handle, your Facebook page, your website?
Let's see. DeniseFenzi.com is my blog. Denise Fenzi on TikTok, Denise Fenzi on Instagram, Denise Fenzi on Facebook. I'm super active in all of those places. The High Drive Dog, Fenzi Dog Sports Academy. If you go to Amazon, I think I'm up to 10 books.
Wow.
I wrote a book about my old dog who's, it's a fiction book. It's actually a beautiful book. If you have an old dog, called Conversations with Reka. It's my favorite book of all time. Love it. You can check that out. I have a kid's book.
Oh, kids book.
Yeah, it's called Blogger Dog Brito. It's about my little white dog, and it's written for children It's great if they want to like learn English or practice. It's written to about a kindergarten level.
Super. I'll
So
look it up.
it's you would read it to a kindergartner, and about a fourth grader could read it themselves, third or fourth grader. So that's a book for the little ones.
Yeah, I've got a 3-year-old and
Um,
a 7-year-old boy.
It's actually perfect. That's exactly the target
Yeah.
age. Yeah.
Okay.
So
Um,
I'm everywhere, and you can find me easily.
Awesome. Last question, promise.
Yeah.
No one likes to say it, but which would or who would you say would be your most special dog?
Oh, Reika.
Rika?
Yeah, she just followed me through so many changes in my life.
Mm,
And with my children growing up, she was there. She's 3 weeks older than my youngest son. So I think she was there as I had already transitioned methods, but was in one of my more irritable phases, not so good with people. She was there as I learned to be an adult and how to
Yeah.
present myself in a way that changed behavior.
Yeah.
She was, I would say, she taught me. There were so many stories that we don't have time for that
Yeah.
really cemented my understanding of dogs and dog behavior and how to be fair, and really changed. I was already a positive reinforcement trainer, but changed how I thought about things. So I would say she was super influential in my life, and I miss her.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, maybe that's a topic for our next conversation. It'll be a podcast
Yeah.
dedicated to Rika.
That would be lovely.
All right. You have a wonderful day. Thank you so much for being on What's Up, Dog.
Thank you for having me. You have a
Thank
good
you.
afternoon.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
See you.